Hello, today we're going to study comparing and ordering real numbers. In this first slide, we are going to replace each gray circle with the symbols less than, greater than, or equal to make a true statement. The best way to compare and order real numbers is to convert each expression as a decimal and then compare decimals like you did in elementary school, looking at each place value. So you'll need a calculator to do this lesson. A scientific calculator would work best because you'll need to have the square root and cube root functions. So in this first one, we're comparing the square root of 7 to 2 2/3. When you calculate the square root of 7, the approximation rounded to the nearest thousandths is 2 and 646 thousandths, 2.646. We know that 2/3 is equivalent to 6/10 repeated. If you did not know that, you could use your calculator to calculate 2 divided by 3 because the fraction bar represents division. So 2 2/3 is equivalent to 2 and 6/10 repeated. So now we want to compare. The ones place in both of these numbers has a 2, the tenths place has a 6, but then when we go to the hundredths place, we have a 4, and on the right side, there's not a number, but because the 6 is repeating, that would become a 6. 4 is less than 6, therefore the square root of 7 is less than 2 2/3. Moving to number 2, to change a percent to a decimal, we simply divide by 100 or move our decimal point 2 places to the left. So 15 7/10% is equal to 157 thousandths. We'll need to use our calculators to calculate the square root of 200ths. When we do that, we will be rounding to the nearest thousandths, and to the nearest thousandths, we have 141 thousandths. The tenths place has a 1 in both, but when we look at the hundredths place, we're comparing the 5 to the 4. 5 is greater than 4, so our symbol is greater than. 15.7% is greater than the square root of 200ths. In number 3, we're comparing 2 7/10 repeated to the square root of 7 7/10, which is approximately 2 and 775 thousandths. The 2's are the same in the 1's place. In the 10's place, we have a 7. We'll expand this 2.7 by repeating the 7's. In the hundredths place, we still have a 7 for both. When we get to the thousandths place, we have a 7 on the left and a 5 on the right, which means that this is going to be greater than, because 7 is greater than 5. So 2 7/10 repeated is greater than the square root of 7 7/10. In number 4, we need to be careful because we're dealing with negative numbers. Remember that negative numbers are to the left of the 0, and as you are moving on a number line, as you're moving to the left on number line, your numbers are getting smaller. As you're moving to the right on number line, your numbers are getting larger. So -6 1/3 is equal to -6 3/10 repeated. Again, that's a fraction that you probably know. If not, you can use 1 divided by 3 on your calculator. You will need a calculator to calculate the cubed root of 240. And give me 1 minute. If you're not sure how to do that on your calculator, please make sure that you ask. You're looking for a cube root. It might be a radical sign with an x as the index. That's where you would put the 3. So when I calculate the cube root of 240, I get 6 and 214 thousandths. So negative 6.214 is an approximation for negative the cube root of 240. So when I get to the tens place, I notice that I have a 3 and a 2, but remember these numbers are negative. So negative 3 is less than negative 2. So the less than symbol is what we're looking for here. Negative 6 1/3 is less than negative the cube root of 240. Moving to number 5, we're going to convert 240% to 2.4, 2 4/10. Percent to decimal is moving your decimal point 2 places to the left or dividing by 100. And then we're going to take the square root of 5 76/100, which is also 2 4/10. They are equal to one another. They're the exact number, so we use the equal to sign in that gray circle. Number 6, we're dealing with negative numbers again. The square root of 15, so we're going to have a negative sign here, is approximately 3.873. If you look at your problem before you do the rounding, we know that we're comparing that to negative 3.5. So I could have rounded simply to the tenths place instead of going to the thousandths place, because we can see here that the 8 is different than the 5 in the tenths place. A negative 8 is smaller than a negative 5. So again, this is a less than symbol for our answer. Negative the square root of 15 is less than negative 3.5. Please remember to be careful with your negative signs. Okay, let's move on to ordering real numbers. Okay, and now we are going to order sets of numbers from least to greatest. So we're going to again need a scientific calculator to convert to decimal form. The square root of 10 to the nearest hundredth is 3 1600. That's an approximation. The square root of 8 to the nearest hundredth is 2 8300. If we want to put these in order from least to greatest, we see that the square root of 10 is greater than 3, so that's our largest. Our smallest would be the 2.75 because we have a 7 in the tens place and the other numbers have an 8 in the tens place. 2 8/10 repeated to the hundredths place. Because of the repeating, you would have an 8 in the hundredths place compared to the 3. So after the 2.75, the next number would be the square root of 8. Please notice that I'm using the original format, not the decimal conversions when I'm putting these in order from least to greatest. Next would be the 2 8/10 repeated because that still has a 2 in the ones place. And then finally, the largest of the set is the square root of 10 because that approximation is 3 1600. You'll notice that the directions also say to graph these on the number line. So 2.75 would be halfway between the 2.7 and 2.8. The square root of 8 would be just a little past the 2.8. And the 2.8 repeated, 2 8/10 repeated would be just, I should have a mark on that number line, would be just before the 2 9/10. And then the square root of 10 is approximately 3 1600, so it would be just a smidgen past the halfway mark. between 3 and 1/10 and 3 and 2/10. Moving on to number 8, we notice that we have some negatives and some positives. We need to remember that the negative numbers are always smaller than the positive numbers. So negative the square root of 12 using our scientific calculator would round to negative 3.46. And then we have a positive, the square root of 13 is approximately, this is a positive, 3 and 61/100ths. So in order from least to greatest, our negatives would be first. And remember that negative 3.5 would be further to the left on a number line. That makes it smaller than the negative square root of 12, which would be next. And then positives, 3.5 is less than the 3.61, which was in the original format, the square root of 13. So if I'm placing these on the number line, negative 3.5 is between the negative 4 and the negative 3. Negative 3.46 is very close to that. I'm going to write it's this negative square root of 12 below that. That's going closer to the negative 3. And then on the positive side, 3.5 is halfway between the 3 and the 4, 3 and 5/10, and the square root of 13 is just a little bit further than that. And again, I'll write that down here, the square root of 13. Okay. Next, we will look at some problem solving, a problem to solve. And this is where we apply our knowledge of real numbers to solve the problem. Problem reads, on a clear day, the number of miles a person can see to the horizon is about 1.23 times the square root of his or her distance from the ground in feet. Suppose Frida is at the Empire State Building observation deck at 1,250 feet, and Kyra is at the Freedom Tower observation deck at 1,362 feet. How much farther can Kira see than Frida? So let's do some calculations, and you may use your calculators. So Frida is going to be 1.23 times the square root of her distance from the ground, which is 1,250 feet. And when I use my calculator to do that, I get, well, let's see this again. Make sure that when you work with a calculator, your answer is reasonable. Here we go. And I'm going to round to the nearest tenth this time. 43.5, 43 and 5/10. And it says up here that the number of miles a person can see. So this is miles. And then we'll do the same for Kira or Kyra, depending on how you pronounce it. It's 1.23 times the square root of the height, which is 1,362. Again, we're using our scientific calculator to do these calculations. And this is 45. Again, I'm rounding to the nearest tenth. And this is in miles. Did I answer the question yet? Go back and reread it. It says how much farther. So I need to subtract to find the difference. Difference means subtraction. So 45.4 minus 43.5 is 1.9. You'll probably say that it's approximately 2 miles farther. Okay, I hope that you've enjoyed this lesson on comparing and ordering real numbers. Please remember to send us messages or ask questions in class. Have a great day.